Why the disconnect between Africans and African Americans when we have so much that connects us?
So the basic connection is the fact that all of us who are of African ancestry in the US, we originated in Africa. We started, we were brought to what would become the US and changed.
The situation between Africans and the Americans of all of the Americas, or even just the United States, certainly the question of slavery is key.
That for 400 years, there was a slave trade that was going on. And that slave trade brought literally millions of people from Africa to the United States, to what would become the United States. And those people came in chains. The first ones arrived on the East Coast of what is now Virginia, in 1619.
1502 is the earliest date that we know in the Americas that we can prove so far in the Americas that Africans were enslaved in the Americas.
My research on African American history in the West suggests that there were Black people who came up from Mexico at least a century earlier than 1619.
Identify as African. I'm an African with American paperwork. Malcolm X said it doesn't matter how many generations you raise cats in the oven, it don't make them biscuits. See what I'm saying? I'm an African with American paperwork. And if I had any questions about that, the day the police handcuffed me to a chair and beat me, reminded me exactly who I was.
When Black people were brought to the United States, they were taught, or at least when these Africans, let's put it like this, when these Africans were brought to what is becoming the United States, or what became Brazil, or what became Mexico, they were physically taught to try to forget everything that was African, to forget their connection to the African continent.
We Black Americans were put through the most brutal experiment on dehumanizing people ever done without killing them, right? There's genocides, which ours does qualify as, but we were violently uprooted from speaking our language, from learning our religion, to knowing our names, right? So we were forcefully wiped of our hard drive, if you will, of everything that was African, and they just kept the body. That's all they did. They kept the body, but all the programming is gone. We had to relearn Africa.
They stopped being Africans because they were forced to. They were brutalized, and that was another very, very sad time in American history, in African history, in African American history.
During the period of slavery and afterwards, there was not necessarily a felt connection with Africa. And in fact, there was some shame, partly because they were enslaved and they did not want to associate with the idea of enslavement. They wanted to distance themselves from any part of Africa that would remind them of enslavement.
My point here is that there are two things that are going on simultaneously. On one hand, there's a conscious effort by the political power structure, the economic power structure, more specifically by slaveholders, to try to make people of African ancestry forget all about Africa, while at the same time, there's a conscious and subtle effort on the part of Africans or people of African ancestry to remember their connection with the African continent. So there's this conflict that's going on, this cultural conflict, in the sense that some people saying officially you cannot claim to be African, yet unofficially there were people who were saying, yes, we are African and we want to remember that.
It was very negative. It was a very negative view of Africans that I remember, watching TV and thinking that everyone there lived in the jungle and had huts.
comments made based on my cultural identity from being from the Caribbean, from Black Americans. Called you coconut, or would say something, like, you didn't have shoes or whatever, based on what their perceptions were of the Caribbean.
There was a lack of beauty that was imbued to Africans. And I remember there's almost a synonym between black and African and ugly. But I remember, that was like, oh, you're like a ugly black African or something.
Yeah, black African was,
and these
like
are black
worst.
kids. Yeah, exactly.
Insult.
And so it's like, where did that come from?
One of the reasons there is some disconnect between Africans and African Americans, I think it's really driven by a lot of the white culture we have. It's very well known in the medical industry, an African doctor is thought of higher than an African American doctor. So to me, a lot of the disconnect, and that's in a lot of different things, and I think the white racism in America feeds into some of that disconnect.
Before coming to America, my perspective about African Americans were that they were lit. We were all about trying to dress like them, talk like them, move like them, rap like them, all of that. So I thought they were hood, I thought they were gangsta, I thought they were lit.
Their image introduction to us was cops, gangster rap. You know what I'm saying? Black folks on the news, committing crimes, getting locked up, gang banging, you know what I'm saying? Selling drugs and whatnot, right? Well, what parent in their right mind would want to associate their children with that crowd of riffraff?
What they see in movies, how they see black people act on shows, especially, the gangster crime movies, that's what they expect too. And the other part of that is kind of the ritzy rich, aka bougie kind of African American perception. So I think a lot of it comes from media.
From a Caribbean perspective, we saw or classified African Americans as being lazy, untrustworthy, criminals, drug addicts, involved in nefarious activities, not hardworking, undereducated.
So when all you get shown of Black Americans is gangsters in handcuffs, and all we get shown of Africans is starving babies and AIDS, huts and jungles, how can we communicate?
So there's always been this mistrust, this divide, this chasm, and it's unfortunate. And hopefully I have more faith in the millennials and the cloud generation, that they will do something to break down these barriers, and that we all can then see the world from a common perspective instead of these divides that we have always struggled with, particularly in my lifetime. And I hope it'll be better for my children.
There can be more cultural exchanges. The extent to which African Americans travel to Africa and learn about Africans in Africa, and the extent to which Africans come to the US and learn about African Americans with an open mind in the US, I think that breaks down these barriers. The very fact that you and I are having this conversation and you're doing this documentary is part of the breaking down of those barriers.
I'm glad you're doing this documentary. And I hope it helps to bridge that gap, because I know there's still there's some things that need to be resolved. And the only way, I'm in media, so I understand about telling stories. And the only way we can get our word out is to tell stories and to share stories, and to reach out and to connect.